fairness and explainability. So I hope you all had a good time in the initial part of the Ravi and Chris, and we had also the director and Mahesh give brief talks. This will be a more focused roundtable. So we have speakers. Okay, yeah. So as you have, I'm Professor Ravindran here, and no one got that joke. So this is see Ravi, Tushar, and Murli, Manish. Bindu was unable to come today, so but she has sent some questions which she would like to address. And Vikram from Samsung and Swapna from Epidome, and that's me, Harish. So I'll just go over the brief idea of what these things even mean. Like, I mean, ethics, fairness, and explainability. The panel members obviously know, but for the audience here, I'll give you obviously these things require more than a day to even just explain one of them. So what I'll give you in a brief, say 10-15 minute talk here is a sense of what are the possible problems here and what have we, what are the approaches to take for solving these, right? So, and then we'll have the speakers introducing themselves briefly for a few minutes, and then we'll have a roundtable panel discussion where we have questions from, we already have a curated list of questions, and we also welcome questions from the audience towards the end of the discussion, right? So just to set things up, so this essentially was, I lifted some of this material from a talk that I had given as a part of the professional ethics course lecture in IIT Madras. So it's an apt lifting. So it's not really lifting. So the first things, right? I mean, direct ethics really enters in AI, right? I mean, this is one of the classic ethics problems in philosophy, right? I mean, this is called the trolley problem, which you will actually have to solve in AI, right? I mean, you might actually as a system engineer, you might actually write code like this, right? For example, you might have a variable which detects whether there is a pedestrian in front of you. You might have a variable which detects whether there is a vehicle behind you, right? You might actually write this question, right? Say, if pedestrian is true and there is a vehicle behind you, well, what are your options, right? I mean, you can either say, well, the pedestrian is jaywalking and I'll just go forward, or you can veer left, right? So then that means that you actually have to write one of these things, right? So this is really, that means that you are actually solving the trolley problem, right? So the trolley problem, as some of you might know in ethics, is you have two options. In one option, you kill one guy, another option, you kill 5 guys, but there is some slight differences between. And there is no right or wrong decision, but there is a debate going on there. That means that in AI, I mean, we all actually have to solve the problem even say humans are driving the car, but we don't really need to frame the answer beforehand, right? I mean, you can always not solve the problem until the problem comes to you. But as an AI system, you have to actually write this, right? So that means that ethics and philosophy problems come directly at you when you write an AI system. This is not a machine learning thing. It's just logic, right? I mean, you have to solve very fundamental ethics problems to just build reasonably decent AI systems. So the main problem is there are multiple perspectives to solving this problem, right? I mean, the perspective is as a driver, what would you like to do? As a driver, you might like to save your life, save property, say you bought a Tesla for 1 crore, you want to probably save that. And so that might be your perspective. But what's the perspective of the pedestrian there, and what's the perspective of the bystander there, and what's the perspective of the company manufacturing the car and the software behind it, right? So there are multiple perspectives, and there is no real easy answer which might satisfy everybody. But still, the question needs to be answered. So ethics sits front and center in AI in several questions. This is the question which has the most direct ethics impact, I would say. So yeah, this is the kind of questions which we will try to handle in our panel here. So there are other ethics questions as well. For example, one might be, say, this recent the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right? So what's the ethical question there? I mean, that's really an application of AI that is, well, has it gone wrong? What happened there? So that's another question that you might answer, right? So how do we, as say scientists, as members of the society, how do you responsibly use AI and data towards, say, the betterness of the world, right? So there are other things as well. I mean, what if the state misuses the data? I mean, there is a huge a database, say, for example, for Aadhaar, or for example, the US government and the NSA collect immense amount of data from Google and Apple and everyone else. So there is potential for misuse, and what do we as technologists what can we do? Do the potential for benefit? Of course there is benefit there. If you can capture terrorists and say crime from happening, that's great. But at what cost does that happen? So does the risk benefit too? So that's a question for the society to answer, right? So the question that, well, does the benefit to risk ratio good enough to move forward with these things? Right? So those are the kind of questions which we will try to handle as well. So, and of course there are these other things. For example, AI is being used for really really strange things. For example, this is one thing which I found on a company. It's called Faceception, and this is, I don't know if this is still up, but when I went about say a month or so ago, I found this in the description. It's like, Faceception is the first to technology and first to market proprietary computer vision and machine learning technology for profiling people and revealing their personality based only on their facial image. Only the emphasis I added. This text was taken verbatim. Right? So this is a little bit scary again, right? You can call this AI, right? But this seems to me as a situation of where you are deciding whether someone is a terrorist or not based on their facial profile. That seems to be, in fact, they use the word profiling, which is kind of, again, a flag. But still, these are things that actually happen. For example, the next site is probably a little bit more scary. They have different profiles for white-collar offender, terrorist, and pedophile, which say, based on the geometry of their face, they can identify whether you are a terrorist or a pedophile. I don't know how it's even possible, but it's a real company, and it's, I don't know if it's making profit or not, but it's a real company, right? No, I don't. You know them? Yes. Wow. That's the thing. They use only the image. Okay. That should not be the only parameter. Right, but it's kind of like using the date of birth and the time of birth to predict your future, right? So is it really relevant? It's irrelevant, but that's the point, right? I don't know. This is my view of things. Of course, there are other possible things. So this is, I don't know. I think this is a situation for where the society must really interact. So yeah, there are other things as well. And for example, the other word that we have here, just fairness. And what is fairness? This again is a question that's ripe for debate and conversation, which is that, for example, say, and this is a typical question, right? When you have bias in, say, someone builds a database of people preferences from social networks and trains a machine learning model on predicting voting behavior, and you have, say, different parties building their manifestos based on that, right? So this is a situation ripe for bias. Why? Mainly because you are building a model from people who are using social networks, which is not the typical population, right? So that's going to be a situation ripe for bias. And this might lead into more bias, right? You have actions which are based on biased data, which might create more bias again. So that's a situation which you should be aware of, right? So there is this block diagram which I found somewhere, which I kind of edited a little bit. So you have ground truth, which is the real, but then when you, so you have ground truth, which is colored by human bias and to get the training data, from which you really train the model, and then you make the predictions. And the human sees the prediction, and when that impacts the world, that can actually change the ground truth itself, right? So that's kind of the cyclical aspect of where bias enforcing, it's kind of not a good cycle where you use bias in your algorithms and that algorithm really solves that bias. So it's very possible that the bias can feed itself. So this is the kind of situation which we really want to be aware of. Right? There is one code which I really liked, which is, again, so neural networks may be said to write their own programs. They do so towards goals set by humans using data collected for human purposes. If the data is skewed, even by accident, the computers will amplify injustice. So this is the code I really liked, and this is something which people should be aware of. Machine learning and AI is not magic, right? These are systems built by humans for human purposes. That means that we should, it's not say the algorithm does that. That's not a valid excuse when you can potentially prevent that. The first time it happens, maybe you don't need to, but it's really up to the technologists and the society in general to have this conversation on when this bias and when proper algorithms can be built without saying escape clauses built in saying that the algorithm did that. Right? So yeah, that's, so what are the real realms of impact for this? For example, the regular impact that you already have is the recommended systems based on Facebook or Amazon, or you already have these impacts. And it is very possible that the predictions that you get might not be based on your personal choices, but rather based on some potentially profiling choices that might happen. So this is probably not so high an impact thing, but as say, bias in legal and government systems, where actually, in the US at least, there have been predictive policing systems decided to use machine learning algorithms for deciding, say, criminal sentences and paroles and bails and so on. So at least the poster child for studying fairness in machine learning has been the predictive sentencing thing, which was brought out by ProPublica. In this, really, this one table really summarizes the crux of the argument, which is that you have a system which is decided for setting bail amount and paroles for inmates. And what does the system do? The system really takes in the demographics and whatever data you have about a prisoner and says, what is the probability that he's going to commit a crime again in the next 2 years? Right? That's what the system says. And based on that number, based on a risk rating, the government really sets bail or decides to not grant parole and so on. So they found that for both whites and African Americans, the error rates were similar. But the errors for whites were on the side of leniency, the errors for the blacks were on the side of strictness. So this was one of the, I would say, the starting points for this entire literature on fairness in machine learning. So this is the kind of problems which we should ideally want to tackle. What is the cause of these problems? We should know. We should try to find out at least. And is it systematic? Is it due to data bias? Is it due to algorithmic bias? So those are the kind of things which we should ideally worry about. Right? So yeah, so this is just general. So the third part of the panel is explainability, and this is really just due to complexity, right? Software systems, say about 200, 300 years ago, the only systems were mechanical systems. The most complicated things that you could see were probably, say, watches with, say, hundreds of gears, right? So that was the most complicated system. So now then you had electronic systems, and then you had software systems, and now you have AI systems, right? So software systems already are pretty complicated. For example, the Linux system is millions of lines of code. It is very hard to inspect that. But it is at least possible to. I inspect it, and you can debug it. For example, there have been successes due to the open source nature of, say, some of these. For example, the secure protocol for internet communication, they've just recently discovered these heartbleed bugs and all that. So that was really due to the fact that the code was available, and code was in a sense interpretable. You can read the code. It is a large amount of code, but it is possible to read and interpret it and understand the impact of it. But that is really not possible for the AI software systems, especially machine learned software systems, where finally, for example, you have some opaque function and which does complex linear algebra and mathematics and takes in, say, a feature vector for a person and converts that to a credit score rating, right? So if you have a system like that, how do you debug that system? How do you know what's gone wrong in that? It becomes very hard to do that, and especially so if you find that it does work well for most situations. The case for removing it is less, but at the same time, you want to know what goes wrong and why it is saying what it is saying. And it might become even more relevant in, say, medical cases where you're saying that based on some medical record, you're saying this person is likely to have, say, cancer or something, and there is no other evidence. But that means that you have to do more riskier tests, more riskier diagnosis, and more costly outcomes based on that. So that means that you have to ideally have AI systems which also give explainable decisions, not only saying what it is saying, but also say why it is saying that. So I'll give you a very simple example of this, and especially because this might be fresh in a lot of people's minds. So I call the Boeing disasters that recently happened, both the Lion Air flight as well as the Ethiopian Air flight, as really as a system which could have been greatly helped by explainability, right? So one of the main pointers that people have said is that essentially the regulatory authorities actually use Boeing designers to certify the same planes. And why is that? It's not a conflict of interest. No one really wants the planes to crash, so that's not true. But simply because the FAA, which certifies the planes, is not really competent to even inspect the code and find out what's wrong with it. So that means that the overcomplicated autopilot systems force regulators to hire Boeing to inspect their own planes. It's really the only thing they could do. And this is not really a machine learning system. It's more of an AI system. The autopilot system is really just a bunch of rules. It's not as complicated as machine learning systems, but even they are not very explainable. So if we had more explainable systems, maybe we could have had an independent party which could have inspected the MCAS system and found out, well, what are these bugs here? I mean, why is it doing such forceful actions of pushing a nose down with one sensor? I mean, these kind of things could have been found out if there was an independent, say, auditor who could do that. But that's really not possible at all with the current situation. Right? So really, the crux of the explainability is that by forcing AI systems to use reasoning that can be used to convince humans, the scope for safety and fairness risks, I mean, they don't vanish, but they diminish significantly. So that's the explainability part of the panel. So that gives you a broad overview of where we are going, like the ethics, the fairness, and the explainability part of it. And yeah, with that, I've set the context for it. So the rest of the panel is going to proceed as follows. So I'll have the speakers give short talks introducing themselves and their work and how AI and ethics, those impact their current jobs. So that's the plan for the next 20-25 minutes or so. And then we'll have a roundtable discussion where we'll have questions which were previously curated, and we'll also have questions from the audience. Okay. So that we can move to the next part. So any questions on this? If we want any questions, we can. Pardon?
Why didn't you pick Neo problem and you picked only this problem?
What's Neo?
Airline problem.
Uh-huh.
You picked 77 max.
Yes.
You could have picked it.
Well, it's more recent in our memories, right? So it's.
Do you think that is an ethics problem?
I don't know actually. So this is more recent in our minds, and it's something which people can relate to. And this is more of an explainability problem than an ethics problem. No one really wants planes to crash. Even Boeing in its minds does not want planes to crash. It's really it's not an ethics problem, so to speak. It's really, I don't know if it's an ethics problem. It's a hard question to answer. But definitely this could have been diminished with a little bit more transparency from the software systems, which I don't know if it's possible, but that would have definitely helped. Yeah. So maybe we can have 5-minute talks from. So Manish, do you want to talk?
An admission that we have only recently begun to think about these issues of explainability. This hasn't been I wouldn't claim to be by any stretch an expert or having done significant work in this area. Kind of one point that I want to make is I think transparency can be a fairly powerful tool for many of these issues that we are dealing with. And I'll start with this. I was trying to get the origin of this quote, who came up with this quote first, but I've heard it a lot, that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So the more transparent you make things, as things get scrutinized and so on, right, it becomes easier to then find out some of these flaws. So to us, okay, thank you. You always learn something new. So what the problem that we have been dealing with, and again, it hasn't been for fairness, transparency, but of videos themselves. I'm not talking about AI systems. I'm talking about videos themselves tend to be very opaque objects, and our mission at VideoCan, we've been trying to make them more transparent through AI. So one question is, why bother with videos? So I would claim that whatever we do with text today, we will start doing with videos tomorrow. So a lot of even the fairness and transparency literature today, when you really look at it, it's been applied to text. Let's say algorithms that are processing text, things like, let's say, if you look at things like fake news detection, or is there a bias here in, let's say, selection of that candidate to be hired. A lot of these are today based on text, but there's a need to start applying these kinds of algorithms for videos as well. So because whatever we do with text today, we'll start doing with videos tomorrow. And videos account for already close to 75% of the internet bandwidth. And this percentage is increasing. It is expected to go up to about 80% by 2020. So broadly speaking, we classify videos into two categories. Sometimes these are fuzzy. Entertainment videos, that again, I mean, I'm oversimplifying, meant for consumers, and informational videos, which often enterprises use for a variety of purposes like learning, marketing, communication. Um, and so what my company does is we've been looking at informational videos and again, use of these informational videos across at enterprises across these various purposes. We started out with the learning use case, but then started looking at marketing, internal communication, and so on. And what we do is we try to make, and one common problem to all of these kinds of, anytime you're trying to convey information as opposed to entertainment videos people will watch for hours together. But anything which is conveying information, somehow, I don't know if it's just me, but I think it's not just me. We all, our brains somehow are wired such that after a few minutes, we start getting impatient. We can't just watch these videos end to end. So what we do is we took inspiration from textbooks and apply AI. So we are analyzing both the audio part of the video as well as the visuals and trying to automatically create these three kinds of indices which were inspired by textbooks. The table of contents, which is showing you all the topics which are covered, phrase cloud, which is like the index at the end of the book, all of the key concepts. And we also provide a full search capability over the complete transcript of the video. And ideally, I would have liked to show you with the real example, but I mean, maybe after this, you can just go to any of these, let's say, go to, let's say, the NeurIPS conference, which is the top AI conference. All of their conference videos are being played using our player, where what you see at a glance are these summary, like the table of contents, which shows you all of the different topics which are being covered. And then if you're interested in a specific topic, you just click there and it directly takes you to that part. The second index it shows you is this phrase cloud, where it automatically tries to summarize out of the thousands of words that were uttered in the video, which are the key concepts, key phrases that have been uttered. And when you click there, it shows you the context of in what context they appear, and then lets you jump directly to those points, and then you do your search. So sorry, that was kind of a detour, and sorry for kind of taking this time to talk about, promote my company's products. But back to the problem that has been stated, I would argue, and we have started to think about these issues. So a few months ago, I really started thinking about it, about the ethics part, because what we do is on our company website, we allow anybody to just submit any arbitrary video that they've seen and say, okay, submit it to be indexed. And I often keep reviewing what kind of videos are people submitting on our web page. And I've been finding a lot of very fascinating kind of, sometimes there's a documentary, a science documentary, and all kinds of things. I've been learning a lot of stuff just by watching what people are posting. But I got horrified to see a presentation by a bank that somebody posted some time back. And this bank was selling what seemed like snake oil, kind of cryptocurrency network and blockchain phone and all kinds of things, and how it is going to feed this virtuous cycle. And those of you who are in the audience right now, how it's your chance to make the millions. And I said, do I really want to index and kind of allow this to be posted on our on our page? So as we started thinking about these problems, right? So one kind of interesting problem that we would love to work on, and I would invite kind of collaborations from people who might be interested in some of these topics. For instance, is this a fake news video targeting minority groups? And I would say fake news detection is kind of hard. So a subset of the problem, maybe a simpler problem, could be automated detection of bigotry. Can you identify that, yes, this video is trying to convey some kind of bigoted views? And unfortunately for us as society, but maybe thankfully for us as machine learning scientists, there's a lot of easily labeled data, right, available. You can watch a lot of, especially in today's climate, right? You can you can go to those sources of and watch their videos and label them as examples of these videos showing bigotry. And so technically, right, the way you would identify this would be through a combination of analyzing content, style, and perhaps metadata, right? What are the sharing patterns and so on of these videos. We have done some of this work in.
Sometimes this content might be true, but the editing part of it, meaning the way they sequence the,
Yes.
that is with the intent of influencing the person who sees it. I don't know if that is part of the content that you're.
I'm trying to, maybe cover that under style as well, because sometimes it's also the manner in which you try to inflame passions and so on, because often content is just one piece. And we have looked at it in the context of learning videos, because we did some work to say, is this video covering what's the breadth and depth of coverage of concepts that is being covered for that learning video, and what is the teaching style? Is this an engaging style, or is this like a monotonous voice? So we were looking at a combination of voice tone, hand gestures, and how dynamic the content were. So some of these could be adapted to kind of start looking at the style as well. But again, I mean, I haven't seen, and in fact, there's a need, because I mean, if you really think about what Facebook and all are being asked by some governments to do, is to kind of exercise certain restraint, right, in terms of what videos they post readily on their sites, and both things like the shooting incident as well as during election season, right, as you're trying, because these are getting used a lot by various organizations, right, with their nefarious intents to influence election outcomes and so on. So there's a real need for us to, ideally in real time, to be able to do these things for videos. And I don't believe today effective solutions exist. So I feel some of what we have done could be kind of extended to do this. You have.
I think you made the point that it's easy to label the data set as created or not. I seriously doubt that if that was the case.
No. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying there's a lot of easily labeled data which is available, which you can use at least as a starting point. There's a lot of.
I would actually disagree with that completely, because
Okay.
coming back exactly to the point made at the start.
Okay.
That labeling itself has bias in it.
Sure.
Right? And the second point is freedom of expression, right? This goes directly against freedom of expression. How do we know something is labeled as bigotry?
I agree. I agree. And so I completely agree it's a complex issue, and I'm not advocating that it should not be posted. All I'm saying is it would be nice to be able to have some kind of a commentary associated with.
But very careful where those labels are coming from.
Sure. But granted. And there's no doubt, right? This is a complex subject, but it does require further work. Okay. Then is this video perpetuating biases? There are all kinds of gender, racial, religious biases, and while we have seen a lot of work on recommender systems, I mean, ideally, you would also like to see whether you can influence the recommender systems, for instance, to avoid recommending some such videos, especially in the context of things like learning, if it is going to perpetuate those biases and start flagging relevant sections. And we've already seen, again, there are companies which are just like there are companies which are trying to automatically analyze resumes and trying to help shortlist candidates. There are likewise companies which are beginning to show how do I help you shortlist candidates based on video interviews and so on. So again, I mean, how do we start guarding against those biases? So again, these were, I thought, some interesting problems where what we have done could be a starting point for building such analysis tools for videos, but a lot more work needs to be done. Thank you.
I don't have a presentation. My name is Swapna. I run a company called IP Dome. IP Dome provides intellectual property strategy and services. But the primary reason why I am here is because I am, as a lawyer, I am part of the IIT Ethics Committee, and we study ethics in the proposals that are presented to us. And lately, we have been seeing a number of proposals that come from IIT researchers, either sponsored or generated from inside the institution, which have to do with AI, facial recognition, data collection, both in the social sciences areas as well as computer science and algorithm areas. So for me, primarily the issues that I see in as an ethics committee professional or as a lawyer are what I call the 3 Cs, that is consent, creep, and confidentiality. So, and this is with data collection, and I'll come to AI in just a minute. So data collection, the issues are you getting the consent that you require to get? Is the consent based on true information? Is it based on full information? Does the person giving up the right to own his data or her data or to protect her data aware of what the data is being collected for, who's collecting the data, who's storing it, what are they going to do with it, and for how long or for what period it's going to be stored, by whom it's going to be stored, what kind of derivative data is going to be derived from it, and if it's going to be used for facial recognition or other such things, including my criminal records and health records, then do I really want it to be there? And very importantly, can I withdraw it? And as we know, quite a bit of work has been done in the legal sphere as well. Once the data is collected, it's very difficult to get back. Even if I don't want to enroll or de-enroll from any of the subscriber data that we are on, whether it's a consumer platform or a group, project like Geo or a project like Aadhaar, let us say it's wrong and I want to de-enroll, can it ever be done? And can it be closed? Digital death or digital identity, can it be removed completely? Traces can be removed. These are the issues that have to do with consent. With creep, creep is sort of you collect for a reason and then it creeps into other purposes. So Aadhaar was collected saying that it's a welfare measure for those who don't have any other form of identity, but eventually all of us are now enrolled, although we have 15, 16 cards identifying me as Swapna and all of you as whoever you are. And then in addition, we keep getting newer and newer cards, also from retail vendors and fidelity cards and online cards and coupons that all identify us and in different areas of our experience. Now, all of this data then goes into something like Cambridge Analytica, which decides for us what content we see, or it goes into security agencies where it wasn't intended to go in the first place, at least when they asked for consent, or it goes into Federal Aviation Authority's databases to see where we are traveling, which was not intended in the first place, and so on. So this is creep, and this is a violation of the consent conditions under which the data was made available. In the same creep comes ownership. So the ownership keeps going to different people in different ways and formats and forms, and probably for different reasons. And that was not what I consented to. When I consented to give my data to UIDAI, I didn't expect Morpho or L1 or Safran to be able to access it, but then there it is. So part of creep is also who owns the data, who is storing it, and who's deriving more information from that. And finally is confidentiality. That is about what kind of sharing that data is going to go through. Is it for value? Is it for free? Is it exchange value for them? Now, the government, I presume, will have some kind of an eminent domain right over whatever assets are available. So the government could probably, for the greater good, larger good, security, whatever it is, probably access all data available with whichever authority is controlling it. But whether Geo will be able to trade on my data, and isn't it better that I be able to trade personally? Then probably I'll get the money that Geo is getting by selling my data. So that kind of thing is also part of the confidentiality issues. Now, AI, and I'm not a computer professional, I'm not an AI professional, I'm a lawyer working on these areas. So for me, AI is something that is built on all of this. So the data that's collected, not just from me, but from whole communities of consumers, people who live, residents, voters, bankers, whatever it is. And on top of that, they build an algorithm, and then they use that for various purposes and expect those decisions to be better than what human beings can do. Sometimes it appears to be true. Like, I don't know how many of you are aware of what happened in Thoothukudi. Yeah. So probably if there had been an AI monitoring the situation, like the videos that Manish was just talking about, then they would have known that the lakhs of people that were marching to meet the collector was not a violent crowd. It was going there with the express intention of seeking to petition the collector. So in such governance issues, probably big AI data of amorphous people where no single person can be identified, but whole crowds can be identified. Whole an understanding can be given for the governance purpose that this group is going to be violent, is going to be rioting, or this group is going to be gherowing a school or an institution, probably that's a relevant use of AI. But if they are going to do facial recognition like faceception, which is, I think, a pseudoscience, honestly, yeah. So it probably stems from the 1860s process of measuring people's heads, or our own ideas of where the scheduled tribes and the scheduled castes came up from. I would honestly be very suspicious of such use of AI. With regard to my work in the ethics committee, one thing I have noticed is that for whatever reasons, commercial entities, companies, corporations are very careful about ethics. They probably are worried about lawsuits. They're worried about large damages that they may have to pay. But whatever it is, they end up being more ethical in their work generally than some researchers in institutions who have very little understanding. Inside an insulated institution like IIT, it is easy to see, or it is easy for a researcher to conceive of a facial recognition software. Say a program that will tell them how many students attended this course. Now, in that context, it probably doesn't seem like an evil process. But once the algorithm is developed, and once the process is made, and once it's robustly tested, and then it goes out of the campus, it's likely to have other repercussions. So one area that we are also trying to do also in my company, in IP Dome, is to try and bridge this gap between ethics in intellectual property ethics and the use of intellectual property inside institutions, and how they are used in the corporate world or in the governance world. In macro levels, we often come to know of institutions like Facebook or Amazon being not really ethical in the use of data. But even there, I find that there is some level of an attempt is being made at self-regulation. I did read recently about the issue of K. James um, joining the ethics board of Facebook. And there are issues of who is being asked to sit on these ethics boards, and what is their primary bias, or what is their primary motivation for sitting on these boards. So the issues that we do face from the perspective of ethics committees is to try and bring in as much diversity as we can to sit on the ethics committees that approve these projects or approve these proposals. We should be ideally trying to bring in as many different types of people, maybe persons with disability, persons of different caste backgrounds, class backgrounds, economic backgrounds, now regional backgrounds, and probably a couple of foreigners as well, because there is no law that says that foreigners should not sit on ethics committees for IIT or any other institution. So these are the issues that we are currently dealing with institutionally as well as outside. I'm really looking forward to the discussion that's likely to happen here. Thank you.
Good morning. So it's interesting to hear various definitions of ethics, many applied and many pertaining to their own professions. But interestingly, through an understanding of meta-ethics and ethics and then applied ethics, it's actually difficult to, because Professor Muralidharan and I were reading a lot of articles about AI and ethics, and especially from the European side, who seem to be more fundamentally grounded in ethical considerations of AI issues than the American side. And one of the things that, yeah, okay, granted. So the main issue that I saw was actually ethics is seen as a kind of an appendage in most of the discussions. People are worried about lawsuits, as Madam was saying, and then also from my own reading of also teaching professional ethics for almost 21, 22 semesters in IIT. So what is interesting is that I'll give you a very short example. This was the Satyam days when Satyam became Metas, because completely just kind of punning on Satyam because Satyam became Asatyam because they flipped, right? They became metas. So, and we had a lot of problems here because of lawsuits and other things, and the parents used to come and blast us for not even providing proper accommodation to the students. So it was actually heady days of Satyam becoming metas, literally flipped. Um, so when I used to ask the students, what is the value of professional ethics? Then before Satyam, nobody cared about professional ethics. That particular semester, everybody raised their hands, 300 students. Ethics is very important. So that is our understanding of ethics, sadly, in India. Whereas Alan Winfield, actually one of the very, very prolific writers, actually what we have done is we have just, it's a cut and paste thing, so I apologize because we thought that the 5 principles that Alan Winfield talks about in this particular article can be the starting point for, I'll just move it. So, what is happening? So we thought that this could be the starting point of a discussion because generally what these European researchers on AI are saying is that we cannot think of ethics as an afterthought as Facebook or some other internet company has done it in the US especially because these researchers argue that security, safety considerations in Facebook are an afterthought. So in the case of ethics, they say that the ethical consideration should be baked into the system. That means it cannot be an and, convenient and. It's more often than not, this and is a disjunctive and. Logically speaking, Arish was mentioning logic. So this is not a conjunctive and. In the case of ethics and AI, ethics or Facebook, internet, any of these technological innovations, ethics is always an afterthought, whether it is Alfred Nobel or Oppenheimer. I can quote thousands and thousands of scientists and technologies. And because that's one of the reasons why technology has failed, because there is no research on diffusion of technologies. It's like 2,000 years, 5,000 years, you can go back from very, very primeval or very medieval technologies to more recent technologies. The failure is because people don't care about how technologies are going to be disseminated and diffused in the society. And major reason is because there is no importance given to ethics. So I'll just read very, very short because we are going to have time for discussions. Robots are tools. And the main thing is do no harm principle, which is actually the fundamental principle. The cost benefit analysis, all those things that we discussed, the legal issues, all these things come after. First principle is do no harm. Just as simple as that. And obviously the counterpoint is national security, right? You can do anything on the basis of national security. This is a basic problem. Second issue is, I just want to, this was actually cut and paste from Alan Winfield's blogspot. Just fantastic articles on this AI and ethical issues. And what they have done is they have given a kind of semi-legal explanation. So I thought we could never write something like this, so that's why actually we picked this up. And they have given a legal definition, then a simple worded definition for a general audience, and they have given a commentary in terms of explanation. So this is actually really beautifully done. The second point is humans are agents. So the robots, do they have agency? That is the next ethical question. We talked about privacy, we talked about responsibility, transparency, all those things. We have the responsibility. So this cannot be outsourced. So it has to be within the existing framework of laws, fundamental rights, freedoms, including privacy. And so there is no escaping it. That is our ethical obligation. So in the case of commentary, we can make sure that the actions of the robots are designed to obey the laws humans have made. So the framework is human legal framework, legal and ethical framework. They are manufactured. So there are obviously problems, design problems, as somebody was mentioning the Boeing example. So I'm not an engineer anyway, so my basic degree was in physics long ago, ages ago. So, but from whatever I have read about the Boeing that the somebody was mentioning they were trying to actually bypass human errors, so therefore they have automated systems. Whereas in this case, the automated system itself was probably faulty, and the humans were trying to rectify it, and the system was fighting it. That's what happened finally. So the system won and crashed. That's all. So if this is a kind of automation or something, then you still cannot escape the responsibility of agency and quality control and all those things. So we have to be very careful in outsourcing responsibility to AI systems or any other systems. Ultimately, humans are responsible. So the vulnerabilities cannot be wished away, however complex the AI is. So they are manufactured artifacts. So the emotions and intent should not be used to exploit vulnerable users. Okay. And the next principle is actually the legal responsibility is clearly affixed. And who is responsible for liability is also very, very important. So, but it's, in the case of AI, as somebody mentioned, extremely complex, right? How do we attribute responsibility? And in terms of failure in quality assessment, how do we affix responsibility? Which is going to be a major challenge. Because the reason why I'm here is because not because I'm an expert on AI, but I wrote an article on aesthetics, and very, very theoretical article in terms of the tension between philosophy of art and theory of art, which has nothing to do with AI currently. But yes, it's the field of AI art is just burgeoning like anything. So when I sent my paper, the very big journal called Journal of Consumer Culture, then they said that you have to address the AI art, artificial intelligence art. And the most recent, I think last year, an AI art of count, one of those art sold for $500,000 in the Christie's. And actually it was able to replicate the human art. So they have the generative framework, and then now they call it creative, GAN, which is generative adversarial network, and now this is creative adversarial network, whatever they want to call it, where they want to actually create art which is human in terms of its outlook, how it can be experienced, and all these things. And there are lots of questions. And finally, actually, the question that once again remains uppermost is the question of ethics. So how do you look at imitations? How do you look at copying, plagiarism, and inauthenticity? All those things come into play, and then there are no answers. There are no easy answers, actually, because how are you going to find out whether this particular stroke is not good, or 90% of this is copying somebody else's work? And many of these issues are really not going to be solved in one day. So this is what kind of evoked my interest in the AI, and then I had discussion with Professor Ravindran, then Professor Muralidharan, others, and then actually Professor Muralidharan is supposed to be here, but anyway, so I'm not Professor Muralidharan, so and he's here somewhere sitting here. So okay, he's back here. So we'll talk more during the discussions. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I'm going to talk about, I'm Tushar, I work at a company called Capital Float. Capital Float is a NBFC, and we essentially do loans for small and medium enterprises and consumers as well. So I'm just going to talk about a little bit of like how artificial intelligence is beginning to kind of make its presence known in the fintech space, and specifically the lending space. Um, Let me just figure this out once. This is kind of how do I go backwards? No. Yeah, so I mean, I think when I was asked to talk about this, like the biggest problem I think that I keep thinking about is all of us are talking about ethics, like fairness and explainability of artificial intelligence. Uh, at least the way I understand it, finally it boils down to like what's the data being used, and the implicit assumption in like how AI should handle this is that the human beings who created that data were ethical, fair, and explainable in like whatever they did, right? And that's the part that I don't think anyone has like really solved or will actually pretend to have solved. But the bar is higher for AI. So like AI is expected to have somehow solved this, and the people creating AI are supposed to address this. I get the objective. I just don't see this as an obvious path because this is like solve humanity while you're building AI. I mean, sure, like we can try, but I don't know how like likely that is. Anyway, having started on that very depressing note, I will take you to one more slightly depressing slide. Uh, I think we would like a little bit of this was spoken about in the morning session as well. This is actually like a real problem, right? So there's like 19th century, 20th century, 21st century India that was being spoken about. I mean, this is crazy. Like, if you think of how much money is concentrated here. Oh, and by the way, this 74%, like 58% is 1%, right? Like, so the remaining 9% are very poor compared to that 1%, right? So, this is like, I mean, a huge, huge gap. And there was also a point being made about the MSME sector, which employs the largest number of people. So, like a genuine problem that has actually been successfully solved in like say America in World War II kind of thing is small companies actually generated a lot of the GDP and a lot of the employment, and a key part of that is having them uh, get access, like getting them to access credit as and when they need it, right? So like loans for businesses essentially grow the business. And yes, some businesses fail, some businesses hire people, fire people, but overall the company, the economy grows when like the SME, the small and medium enterprises essentially grow, right? Maybe that's not the path forward for India, but it is a path that has worked in the past for other countries, right? So fintech in India is broadly like slotted into these four categories, right? So there's payments, there's lending, there's insurance, and there's wealth, right? Some of these names, the payments, like I think, are more recognizable than the others, primarily because they're a lot more ubiquitous than the others, right? Like so, essentially, people use payments a lot more than they need like a loan, and even less like insurance. And the previous slide, basically, there's not too many people who need wealth management services because there's not that much people with wealth. So, I mean, yeah. Having said that, like you will see like people building companies to solve each of these problems, and there is a role for AI to play in all of these to different like extents, right? So what I'm going to focus on is lending, and the like the thing that you need to quickly understand is like why lending essentially, like what is it that we're actually solving in lending. And this is essentially what a, let's say I'm focusing on this shirt manufacturer here. The person buys like this company has to buy cloth, buttons, say dyes, thread, put together a shirt, put it on an e-commerce website which someone eventually buys, right? So essentially like goods or like material and like time essentially flows left to right. The arrow is not very visible, and money goes in the opposite direction, right? So because it takes time for the shirt to be finally purchased somewhere, and that's when the payment happens, and that's when the shirt person gets money. That's when the cloth person gets money, right? But the cloth person has provided cloth, the button person has provided button, and they have incurred costs. The shirt person has incurred costs. So this is what is called a working capital gap. And this is the reason every business always needs a loan. Like there is never a business that's never going to have some form of working capital that they're using, right? Uh, this is what like business loans essentially solve, and capital float is also going after. So we have a loan product that solves for each of these different sets except the e-commerce website. So even the end consumer gets a loan, the shirt person gets a loan, button person gets a loan, like anyone can take a loan, right? Now, again, like finally, I mean, let me be very frank here. The company is solving for profit, right? And that's essentially how you get to profit. So all of the AI is focused on optimizing each of these line items that essentially lead to eventually some form of increased profit, right? So there's a response model to optimize interest. There is an efficiency model to optimize human intervention in the process, which is essentially operating expense. Then there's a risk prediction algorithm to reduce credit loss. So what I'm going to now show are two examples of models that we're beginning to build, which, I mean, feel free to let me know what all biases could be here, but we essentially recognized as soon as we built the models that underlying data is massively biased, and the models are also beginning to show the same biases, like already, right? So we built an address risk score. I've taken out like the performance because that's proprietary, and I've kind of obfuscated the features also. So we essentially can take a text address. So let's say you provide any address from your, say, Aadhaar card, or like say, the credit bureau will give you an address, like any of those addresses. We convert the address to a geotag. So Google APIs essentially allow you to take text addresses and find the geotag. 85, 75% of our addresses resolve to a rooftop, right? 85%, like so 10% more resolve to a locality, and only 15% resolve to a pin code. So every pin code in India obviously resolves to some geotag. So only 15% are not at geotag, at like pin code level, right? Then using the geotag, we essentially get features from Google Places API, Zomato, and Magic Bricks. So if you're not familiar with that, Google Places essentially will give you like how many restaurants around you have a website, how many ATM machines are in some distance within you, like that kind of features. Zomato tells you how many restaurants around you, what kind of like cost per person, like kind of features. And then Magic Brick gives you information on like housing prices and stuff like that, right? So we made a bunch of features, and this was a Bangalore only model at that point in time. This has a fairly, so for those of you who understand like how a model is evaluated, there's something called AUC, or area under like the curve. Anything above like 50 is good, 1 is like ideal, doesn't happen. This one was like a 68, which is highly usable, right? Like maybe not standalone, but like very usable as some other model, right? So essentially what was happening here was, if you think of how all our data is built, like all the data that's already existing, right? Like we gave loans to a bunch of people. We didn't verify where this person was living before we gave the loan, because we are saving operating expense, right? Some people defaulted, some people didn't default. So there was an earlier discussion we had on like whether the tag, the label itself is true or false. Here there is no debate, like the person actually defaulted, like they've not returned the money, so there is no debate on the tag. We're only predicting that tag, right? When it turns out that people from a certain area are not paying while people from another area are paying, the profit and loss statement can be optimized on averages, which is when the area doesn't pay, you'll stop doing loans in that area, right? Now, obviously, it's not 100%. Like in the sense, there are probably like 10% of people who will pay, but 10% is insufficient. Like, it does not make economic sense to do loans when only 10% people pay back, right? If that decision is not made on an individual, but on the address that you chose to live in, actually, I don't know if you even chose to live there, but you live there for whatever reason, or you have provided that as your address. In fact, you may not even be living there, but that's the only address proof you have, like, because that's what I'm taking, right? Like, let's not even get into saying that person actually lives there. That's the only address proof you have. I'm actually forced to decline the loan because it does not make economic sense, and I am a for-profit company, right? I actually don't even know what to do with this. Like, in the sense, this works. Like, this is going to optimize this, like, profit. It's going to increase. People are going to get declined, and like, I mean, life will move on. The company is fine, right? So this is a very like weird decision to make, because I don't know what I'm potentially hurting over here, or who I'm potentially hurting. No, but it's a significant factor. So there will be other criteria, but it is a factor, which means for like in the edge case, all other things being equal, your house address will be the decision criteria, right? Because if I put 10 factors and make 9 equal, this becomes the decision criteria. And it will not happen every time, but it is like mathematically bound to happen sometime, right? So yeah, no collateral. But that shouldn't matter, like in the sense, this is splitting risk on the same type of loan. Like it's not like one loan was collateral, one loan was without, like it is, the model is built statistically like correctly. There is no bias in like how I built the model. Like this is actually predicting what actually happened, right? And that's like one kind of problem. I don't have an answer. Like I know that this is an issue. Yeah. 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 Like I said.
Are you taking care of those kind of biases that are in the data, not a ground truth bias or a model bias,
Yeah.
the data bias? Are you taking that into account? So, for example, certain areas are overrepresented represented in your model and certain are less represented, right, in your model.
Possible. Yes, I agree.
So that makes it not completely statistically unbiased because if your
True,
data
but
is
that's true for all models.
no, not for economic, like we don't.
I understand, but like for all like profit models, I guess.
Economists do
Yeah.
profit and we care about the data generating process as well. So I think so. I'm just saying
Agreed. This
caution
is
against saying that it's statistically unbiased.
fair. So it is like, I guess it's unfair to say it is statistically unbiased. It could be statistically biased, but it is the best available data that we have. And the point is, it does increase profit, right? So it like the objective function of this was cut credit losses. It cuts credit losses, right? So it is solving the problem it was told to solve. It definitely has some impact, disparate impact on different sets of people, which we are beginning to look at, but we don't have like a framework of this is how you build a model and solve, right? So for sure, like I don't have the answer to it. Like,
But what I'm saying is there are frameworks in non-computer science fields such as econometrics where actually the whole field of structural econometrics is about data generating process, which actually controls for some of these biases.
great,
So
okay.
that's just like some things to look if you could
But if you have sufficient data and this is getting called out, would you still use it?
maybe we can talk about
Yeah. Yeah, it's legal because the law doesn't say anything. No, I'm not claiming causation. I'm actually saying correlation. Of course, yes. Yes. No, it doesn't. It basically takes it to a better state than we are today. But that's the general direction that we are trying to go to in any case. So I think what I'm calling out is like it's very easy to essentially go down the path of every person is focused on like I'm going to like I have a job description which says improve this. Like I got a model that does it. I will go ahead and do it because it seems very like trivial in the context of the job that you are solving, which is like I got an answer that solves my problem. I will implement, move on. For sure, there are issues around like this model. So like something like in the US, I think this is outright illegal, like by law.
Well, it is a US example actually because this is a famous Palo Alto West Indies problem for insurance.
Yeah,
It is a 20-year-old problem. People did this every time, and this is how they used to price the premium for insurance. If I have a red car on Palo Alto East, you can be sure and pay 2x or 3x. So the problem is not with the model. See, you are from Sadashiv Nagar,
yeah.
so you lend to people in Sadashiv Nagar, essentially.
No. I mean, this is all over.
Sadashiv people don't need money. And you are based in Sadashiv Nagar, so you should ask a very social question. That what are you trying to solve?
No, so actually, okay.
It's not a mathematical problem in my view.
No, the loans are not in Sadashiv Nagar. Like the office is there, and everyone works from there. Yeah, fair. So like the point is the loan. Actually, the loans are SME loans, right? So they're spread across the industrial areas for the most part. All right.
No, he asked for feedback. I think they're trying to create a model.
So yeah, the other one is actually like probably going to trigger even more discussion. So
This is the CNN example. Manish, you should solve it.
okay, I'll just describe what we're doing, right? So we essentially have Kirana store images, and these are Kirana stores all over like India, not just Sadashiv Nagar or Bangalore. The first one was Bangalore only. This one essentially is trying to figure out what we're trying to do is, can we figure out risk from an image, right? So not facial recognition of a face of a person, this is image. And the hypothesis here is that a microfinance underwriter, like today a person who does microfinance manually, this person actually takes visual cues from the store, which is, if I have a Pepsi fridge inside the store, or if I have a neon signboard, I essentially end up getting rated higher, and it works for them at a 10% like operating expense, because the human being has to make that decision, and the cost of the loan goes up. So this is essentially like an attempt to try and get the credit learning of the microfinance underwriter without the opex of the microfinance underwriter, right? So essentially, we're trying to figure out, can we actually at least get to business type? And if you see true positive rate on the right over here, the two data like types that we actually had like reasonable number of data from is like decent. It's not great, but it's like starting to show something. If we collected more data, we'd probably get there. Also, the photographs I'll show you are very not standard format at all, right? Like they were not taken for image recognition or a modeling exercise. They were taken for our manual verification process. And then we were like, okay, let's see if we can actually just like get something out of it, right? So this is like, this model has, okay, so it predicts a vector of like probabilities. It'll actually say apparel 100%, digital 0, and like these are the labels that it is trying to predict. So this one it actually said is clothes. This one, it gave a vector. If you take the max, it is still correct. I think basically it's got like a bunch of other stores that it is getting confused by. Pharma 37%, pharma 94. This one it got entirely wrong. It called it pharmaceutical. It's actually a grocery. This one it predicted as grocery, and it was correct because we labeled the data set wrong. So the data set called it grocery again, but it's essentially a like a chai stall or a pan store, which actually happens to be like the second largest prediction also actually. This one it got like wrong again. It said it is electronics, and it called it grocery. This one it got correct, electronics. This one it got correct, tobacco, services. Yeah, so I mean, we actually did like a bunch of stuff and tried and see like if you can directly get to credit risk from this, right? And the assumption again being, are there features in like the image, like say the size of the store, the amount of inventory, how cluttered the inventory is, like we don't even know, right? Like, so we don't know actually what predicts risk. So we're trying to figure out if there is something there. This one, again, very weak signal from like this set of image, like I mean a lot more images, very weak signal, but it has some signal. Like we don't know why it has a signal, but it has a signal, right? Again, I'm pretty sure we can talk about this in the panel, but like a bunch of biases over here, like the nature of the image, nighttime, daytime, locality, signboard language, size of the store, like there's a bunch of stuff that could be underlying, like could be going wrong in the underlying algorithm over here. Yeah, that's what I had. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'll try to keep it short. It's my last session. And basically I want to talk about what we're doing at Samsung and how are we thinking about the subject. Yeah, sure. Sorry. So how are we thinking about various aspects of bias, fairness, and explainability? So, our vision at Samsung is that all our products should be AI enabled. So by 2020, everything will be AI enabled. And that's a lot of products I'm talking about. We ship more than 500 million devices a year. That is more than anybody else in the world, much more than anybody, right? So there's a lot of products out there, but we want everything to be AI enabled. And these are the 5 foundations, Basically, the one should be that the devices always learn from every interaction, even if the devices fail, even if that interaction fails, we should learn from that. The second is being highly personalized, which means user-centric and very personalized, and being able to understand more about the user. The third is that the always there means that devices should work in every situation and understand the context, understand the location, the situation. Basically, being able to understand, being ambient. So imagine, if you're walking around in the room, and the assistant is able to follow you in the room, right, around when you move from one room to another room. So that's what we're working on. And also we are working on robos, because the foundation, the next 30 years, I believe, we're going to see a huge rise of robos. I mean, the smartphone era is almost gone. I mean, the smartphones have been there for like 5-10 years, but I think soon you're going to see devices that are not going to have any form. Okay, so that's what we are working on, and of course, always helpful and always safe, right? So, as of now, current businesses are around these devices, but future businesses all around robots and self-driving cars. So those are the two big focus areas for us, and both of those areas, ethics is very important, because these devices are going to know a lot about you, and they are going to manifest. This knowledge is going to manifest in different ways. So we have been, because of the importance of AI, we are focusing a lot on this, we're investing a lot, so we are hiring thousands of researchers worldwide. Many of the, have started getting a lot of awards, so we have set up R&D centers around the world. And even in Bangalore, we're trying to build that. And we have, Bangalore focuses on 4 areas. So one is voice, which I directly take care of. So voice intelligence, we have Bixby that we launched. Bixby is our answer to Cortana and Siri and so on. And Bixby was launched in 2017. Now we have more than 50 million users. And we are learning every day with the failures of Bixby, because success and failure, AI is not perfect, right? This is the foundation. This is the beginning of AI, I think. There's a lot more to come, right? And so these are the areas we work on. So voice is one area. Vision is another area. So Bixby Vision, and then camera, all the camera features that are there on all our flagships. A lot of them are based on AI, right? And then on-device intelligence is another area where we are looking at the intelligence running in the device, right? Not in a cloud, but in the device. And it's making all our apps intelligent. Every interaction with the user should be intelligent, right? All the apps that run on the phone, including our own apps, including third-party apps, everything should become more intelligent. And then data intelligence is all about the devices that I told you, right? 500 million devices, and learning from that, as well as we have many services that we offer, being able to have personalized recommendations, be it advertisements, be it you can say this recommendation for content. So all of those things being more intelligent, right? So that's what we are doing, and the foundation is all about neural processing. So we are also working on neural processors, and a lot of work is happening in building those processors in-house so that we can actually make it really world best, and So there are 2 areas, so vision and voice. So let me talk about voice first. So in voice, these are the hard problems that we're trying to solve. So there's already voice assistants out there. We have our own ASR system, which we have speech recognition, we have built over the years. We have NLU that we have built over the years. But where are the hard problems? The hard problem is being able to, one is ambient. So being able to work in any condition. Whether it's noisy, there are multiple people in the room. You could have many speakers in the room speaking. You could have person moving, people in a family moving from one room to another. So being able to work in every situation. So that is where it's not so easy, and we are working on it. Second is being able to build a knowledge base that grows over time, and being able to answer any question very smartly, right? And the third is being multilingual. So being able to talk in any language. And that is where we are experiencing a lot of issues. Today, for example, we have things that work in English, but let's say that it has to work in India, right? It's not so easy. You have to have Indian accent, but people don't speak only Indian accent, right? People will code mix. People will speak multiple languages. So that is an issue we're facing with, right? And a lot of the data that we're using to train all this has been collected over the years, but it's just not enough. We are finding that the data is not enough. And many times the data is biased. Okay, for example, children's voice. We don't recognize children's voices very easily. And recently, we are working on an AI speaker. We figured out that the wake up doesn't work very well for female speakers. So these are things that we found in the testing. It passed all the tests, but finally, when we were trying to launch it, right, these things in the final test, user trials, these things came up. So these are real issues I'm talking about. And the fourth is being empathetic, being able to not sound like a robot, but being able to more sound like a human. So voice has some of these challenges. Vision has some more challenges. So vision, when it comes to detecting objects, recognizing objects, it's good. We can do that. But when we talk about making more sense out of them, right? Coming up with semantic labels, for example, that is where deep learning is useful, but only to an extent. There has to be more, and it's not enough. So those are some of the things we're working on. And depth sensing, of course, we do that very well, you know, and so on. Those things are working, but more of you can say the semantics part of it is where a lot of work is happening now in Bangalore. So I think what I expect to get out of this session, I mean, to be honest with you, all of the work that we're doing, you know, we have, I have now more than about 600 people working on AI. But as you can see, you know, in all of this, I think the ethics and explainability, those are weak. I don't think we have enough focus on these areas, and especially being explainable. I mean, what I found is the more accurate the model is, the less explainable it is, right? And so explainability is a big challenge, and it's true for us. Second is around data. So a lot of the data is biased, and because of that, we're finding issues. So how can we systematically treat bias, right? How can we figure out automatically that the data, that there is bias? And how can we design algorithms that can take care of bias? So at the moment, we don't have those. Those are things that we need to work on. So that's it. Thank you.
So, yeah, going last has an advantage and disadvantage. I don't have slides because, you know, when we started putting this panel together, Harish kind of penciled me in because he wasn't sure he was going to get enough speakers for the panel. And at the end, he forgot to take my name off. Okay, I was hoping I wouldn't figure in the panel today. But anyway, so here I am. Yeah, so you asked us to talk about how all these issues will affect us, right, and what we do. And I mean, it's going to affect me primarily, right? I mean, the two of us are right in the crosshairs of anything to do with AI, right? And I work in a sub-discipline of AI called reinforcement learning, right? And so a lot of questions that, there are a couple of themes that people spoke about today that I'll pick up. But before that, everything that people spoke about today relied on having data, right? And what reinforcement learning does is, in fact, it gives you a way of intelligently gathering data also, right? It's a way of controlling how you know, experiment, how do you budget things, and from whom do you gather the data, and so on and so forth, right? So this is, now it gets you into all these ethical issues on doing like blind control trials, you know. So in medical trials, you know, you have some people who are subjected to a treatment and some others who are not. And the same thing could happen with reinforcement learning. And the worst part is it is done on the fly, right? So if I'm using reinforcement learning to figure out what kind of advertisements to show to a user, right? And some fraction of the users would be shown things at random just because my system needs to learn, right? So now, do I need to tell people beforehand that this is happening and get their consent saying that, hey, by the way, I have a system that's going to make recommendations to you, but you know, 10% of the time you'll be seeing something random. Wouldn't that ruin their entire confidence in the recommendation system? Right? So these are questions that we have to think about, which we never really thought about this until like 5-6 years back. I mean, frankly, right? I mean, I started doing my PhD when AI was hot, right? By the time I was coming to the end of my PhD, people are saying, you're doing AI? No, I'm not doing AI, I'm doing something else. You know? So I graduated at an era when people were labeling AI as something different, right? So we didn't have this large ticket label as AI, right? So, and so we never bothered about these issues because we never really thought that our AI are going to run out free and wild in the world, you know. So, but now that it has become a reality, these are things that we have to start thinking about. So the two things that I wanted to pick up. So one was the point that AI is held to a higher ethical standard than humans. That's really true, right? So in fact, you asked these questions about driving, the moral machine study, right? When the MIT Media Labs ran this moral machine study with humans, right? So the moral machine study is the following. So I'm driving a car down the road. This is the question they were asking, right? I'm driving a car down the road. There are some passengers in my vehicle. And I'm suddenly come to a point, there's an intersection, people are just stepped onto the road. And so I have two choices. I can either hit a divider and, you know, risk causing injury to my passengers, or, you know, keep plowing ahead and risk causing injury to the pedestrians. So what do you do? Right? Do you hit the brake and cause injury to your passengers, or do you hit the pedestrians? And when I put it like that, that choice seems a little stark, right? But then people looked at different variations of this, where the pedestrians were, jaywalking versus the pedestrians were old or young kids, and the guys you are alone in the car versus you had near and dear ones in the car. So they looked at various kinds of combinations of this, and they asked questions across the globe. Right? This was not limited to a single demographic. And what came out was very surprising. There's significant regional, cultural variations on what would be your answer. In fact, people in Europe were more likely to spare young children than people in Asia. The numbers are there, right? So when they were asked this question, right? And then similarly, then people were more likely to hit guys who looked inebriated. So social values coming in here, right? Than people, who are genuinely crossing the road and you are at fault. Right? So there are all kinds of issues that come up. So it's not a simple question as to what would you decide, right? Even if I want to have my car behave in a human-like fashion, which human do I pick, right? Is it the Asian, or is it European human, or is it? I don't know if India was covered in the study. India was an exception, is it? Yeah. We just drive over the passengers, don't care. No? Drive over the pedestrians. Huh? 1 point. No. They did do this study in China also. So it was actually. Oh, views. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Everybody's unique. Okay, fine. So that's where you have to AI and do personalization and things like that. So this is one question, right? So even if humans are not able to answer this to the perfect satisfaction of other humans, we are still expecting AI to answer these questions. And so my take on this is we are never going to be able to answer these questions. Right? So what needs to be done is to come up with an acceptable operational parameters, right? Okay, if the AI does do a mistake, right, who is liable for it, right? So in fact, there's another thing which I wanted to add to the list of things in this panel, right? Not just ethics, fairness, and explainability. I also wanted to add policy, because I think quite often for some of these issues, the answer would come from policy. So I'm not going to build an AI that is perfectly right all the time, right? But if I have a way of handling it, right? Cars go wrong, right? There are mistakes that happen when people drive. Right? In fact, the ABS, for example, that is sold as a, like a surefire cure for all braking problems, is not 100% successful, right? So we just figure out ways of handling this through legislation and so on and so forth, right? So I think some aspect of that has to come in. I really liked Sudarshan's presentation where talked about, treating robots as machines. The only problem is once we start calling something as intelligent and then keep telling people to treat them as machines, it's always a problem. Right? I think somewhere along the line we should have figured out a way to change the name from AI to something else. But as long as we say intelligence, there is an inherent bias to assigning more responsibility to the machines than they should be allowed to carry, right? And of course, I always defend AI because in some of my talks for more popular general audience, I always say that AI is like a kid. You have to treat it carefully, and if you put too much load on the kid's shoulders already, it will fail. And so you have to figure out what exactly do you give to the AI to bear, and what exactly you should protect the AI from. It's something that we have to take it seriously. Okay? So that's my short opening statement.
The finance front, which is primarily for Tushar. So had a first couple of questions which were already answered in the talk. The first couple of questions I had were what's the state of AI in fintech, and what do current systems actually are they used for? AI systems, are they used for loans? And you answered both in the affirmative. And just predicting based on that, how much of that is AI? Do you have any idea on that? So would that be?
Yeah. So I think the question made me remember a thing that was, I guess, said as a joke, but I don't know how far from a joke it is. If it's a logistic regression, it's written in Python. If it's AI, it's probably written in PowerPoint, right? So Python is a programming language for those of you who don't know. So a lot of people claim AI because it's easy to raise funds with AI. Literally, VC funding is easier when you're saying that you have AI. It's a fact, and people just use that. Robo advisory specifically, I think is grappling with more basic issues than like recommendation of the right fund, which is robo advisory is trying to solve stuff like people in India are not willing to invest in a mutual fund, but are happier investing in like a house or a FD, which mathematically has proven to be inferior to a mutual fund, but people go on investing, right? And everyone buys insurance from the LIC agent in the form of a unit-linked insurance plan that is actually lower return than everything else, and it does not even cover like life risk to the point that it should, but it will still like sell, right? So like there's more basic stuff that robo advisory is grappling with. Like, and they're like at CAGR for the most part, and some of them have reached to the point where there is some machine learning around, like they will have like the news stream as an input. So if you know that like people are like buying or talking about a certain stock, like it'll bump up like that particular part in your equity pool and stuff like that. But it's very basic. It's not advanced enough to even have these considerations. And the advantage of like robo advisory, like ethical issues, is it's limited since people don't have too much money to invest. Like you can't really have that much of an issue.
So, I mean, other speakers can also pitch in if they have any input. So, I'll target a question to a speaker, but other speakers can also pitch in. So, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a point I wanted to make there itself. A recent audit of several startups in the EU basically found that nearly 40% of the startups that claim that they are AI enabled don't use any AI actually. So that's in Europe. That's not even in India. That's in Europe. So and that's, yeah, we don't have too far to go to catch up. At least Europe, maybe China, no, but at least Europe we can catch up more quickly. Sure. So that's the point. I mean, you were asking about robo advisory, how much of it is AI. That's why I burst out laughing, because not just robo advisory, anything that claims is AI enabled is still suspect. Yeah.
Actually, they are true, I think. It's just artificial intelligence. So, literally speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
AI, this whole thing, is it leading to a degradation in our general domain expertise? For example, the going example, in a traditional better engineering design, you could have designed an engineering fallback. Now you are designing more on computer. Same is true with Samsung. How you design your product. You should probably design product better. Same in finance. People should basic financial knowledge instead of relying on AI kind of.
I can talk about it. Actually, it's true to some extent, especially because of deep learning. Because, for example, earlier in the earlier days, there was a lot of speech. For example, there was a lot of pre-processing that would happen. We would use a lot of hidden markov models or Gaussian mixture models, etc. And a lot of speech features were kind of, speech engineering was done, right? When deep learning came, we just give it data and we just expect it to learn, right? So to some extent, that speech expertise was getting lost. The same thing is happening in vision as well. So what I'm seeing is, yes, you're correct to some extent, and that is probably because of the power of deep learning and the, people just see that because it just performs better. And but the catch is that deep learning relies on data, right? If you don't have data, it won't work. And there's still a lot of work to be done in the area of, one-shot learning or zero-shot learning, or basically learning from with less data, or reinforcement learning, or those kind of things are still evolving. They're not there yet. I mean, they're not widely used in the industry yet. So, yeah. Yeah.
Speech algorithms
Yes.
even in finance to the AI.
Correct. You're right. Yeah, I agree with you.
So, just a quick comment, but again, I mean, we have to also think beneath the, apparent success, right? Fine, deep learning is helping things, but one of the things that often gets ignored is still how brittle some of these AI systems are, and in particular to like specific attacks, handling corner cases, and so on. So a lot of these things often also go in waves, because yes, deep learning has improved, let's say, the accuracy of automatic speech recognition relative to all these carefully crafted methods, but that's not the final word on automatic speech recognition, because there are people who have worked on those models. They would argue that now you need to combine deep learning with some of those kinds of techniques to really handle some of these corner cases. And I personally, because I mean my background is not AI, I used to do high performance computing and so on, and I used to work with all these scientists who would rely on computationals, right, simulations. They would have scientific models and they would rely on scientific simulations of those models, right, which are again abstractions of those models. And I often get kind of shudder when these days the fashion is to do all of those things using deep learning, using machine learning, instead of trying to do simulations of scientific models. And one of the reasons, practical reasons for that is because those things are incredibly expensive, right? So in many cases, doing accurate enough simulations of the underlying scientific theory is still computationally infeasible. So you try to do the best you can, right, in terms of applying now these machine learning models, which seem to work well. However, again, I don't believe that's the final word on what's the right way to be solving these problems, because again, my belief is that ultimately, when you want to make things more robust and so on, you have to ultimately come up with and try and solve the real science underlying the problem.
Yeah, because I was in the US studying, and my initial interest was to look at rationalization of music, especially the great sociologist Max Weber talks about how progressively we have lost touch with, or we have not lost our sensitivity to like hearing, and for example, from the string instruments, and then clavicello and other things, and then now we are on the keyboard, or like extremely complex keyboard age. So increasingly we are losing the sensitivity to ears as well as vision as and the US especially was that he was talking about ambient noise and other things. What I found was going from India, where there's more open spaces and the way we speak and hear things is completely different from when you're actually in a place like this, which is padded and air conditioned, and then naturally my voice actually drops, my shruti or my pitch drops, and I found it very difficult. I used to cough and my voice used to get strained. And actually, what I also found interestingly was that progressively, if you look at 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, the American broadcasters or people in the radio business or the anchors, news anchors, their voice pitch also went down because of extremely sensitive microphones. Then interestingly, what I also found, this is not scientifically done any survey or exercise, what I found was the women's voice, actually which was higher pitched, they became two-voiced. When I broached this subject to one of my friends, he just laughed me out of this thing. Interestingly, as the male voice's pitch goes down, the pitch of the female voice also tries to kind of, you want to use the term optimize, or to kind of align itself with the male voice. And you can see teenage girls, or you can see as the pitch goes down, you see twin voice, and there is a kind of grating voice, that you will hear. I don't know, because if you're used to that voice, you will not hear the voice. But since I'm trained in singing, so I can hear that voice. But it was how socially conditioned, the technology, and the technology conditioned society. This was something I've thought about for 20 years. I have not written about it. Someday I will write about it. But since he mentioned about how the technology influences society and society also influences technology, this kind of suddenly came to my mind now. But it was scary, but at the same time also very interesting to see how our environment, technological advancements, and many things actually make probably human, we are insensitive to sound as we were earlier, to vision also. And there was a very nice black and white photography exhibition, discussion a few weeks ago in our department. And the black and white photography was just, the depth was unbelievable. I'm not a photographer, I don't like photography, but I was able to see the difference between color photography and this depth in the black and white photography. So the point that he mentioned is very important, and as the other person also mentioned, I don't know how to bridge this, whatever you are going to lose because of these advancements in technology. C. Yeah. I've been singing in C for almost 15 years now. 15 years, yeah.
So, yeah, I'll move to next question. So we had one finance question. So we had a couple of healthcare questions, but Bindu dropped out. So, but I'm hoping that Manish can answer some of those. So, so this is really a generic question, right? I mean, what is the state of AI in healthcare in India right now? I mean, do healthcare companies actually use AI, right?
So, see, the state of healthcare itself, right, is pretty pathetic in India. And I think, I mean, maybe I should talk a little bit about the potential for AI, because, I mean, see, what the rest of the world has built is, in the name of healthcare, is really a sick care system. And there's a need to make things, and if we simply follow that Western model, it's going to be a disaster for a country like India. The US has realized that despite being the wealthiest country in the world, it cannot afford its own healthcare system. And if we start aping that system, we are going to be in deep trouble. So there's a very clear kind of, I mean, if you ask any medical professional, right, they will say, look, the key to that is to start making things more proactive, because I mean, the longer you wait, right? So, I mean, a doctor famously asked, what's the most expensive place to spend an evening? And you think of a resort, whatever, 5-star hotel, and so on. I said, no, that ICU in a typical hospital is the most expensive place to stay overnight. The point is that if you have to treat a person in the ICU, it's incredibly expensive. So if you could treat the same person earlier. So I believe in healthcare, what needs to happen is the entire world, the action in healthcare is going to move before the hospital. As we are living our normal lives at home, at work, and so on, we are going to be monitored, instrumented, right? Our health parameters, body vitals, and so on can be collected through things like all these wearables that Vikram, I'm sure, will infuse with AI and so on. And if you can, and this is the kind of data that even healthcare professionals, right, have never had access to this kind of continuous data. So there's a new paradigm that I think we are going to be entering in healthcare itself. But the real action in healthcare needs to be outside the traditional healthcare system, which is really the sick care system, and make things more proactive, where you start analyzing these data and you start suggesting interventions to your lifestyle, because a lot of healthcare problems are due to us, let's say, not eating well, not exercising well, and so on. So can there be more proactive interventions suggested? And likewise, even more proactive otherwise, if there is a need for some medical intervention, can you make things more proactive? Because that is really key to improving outcomes for people and reducing cost at the same time. So in India especially, there's a huge need for us to start building these proactive healthcare systems, where AI will play a key role. And one place where, I mean, I'll maybe, in a panel, it's good to have some controversy, where I'll take issue with Ravi's view of why is AI held to a higher standard than humans? I think we have to. Because otherwise, I mean, it's kind of, at least humans have the ability to ultimately learn and so on, and improve things. AI, I mean, I think there's no way but for us to start to really hold AI systems to a higher standard than a human. And in healthcare, it becomes extremely relevant, because you could have a black box system which you could argue, oh, it's making better decisions than a doctor. But I think we still need to push for explainability and so on in these systems, and hold these systems to a higher standard. Because if you simply compare that with the doctor, you said, look, the doctor is not making his decisions explainable. So why are you holding this AI system to that higher standard? But I think we have to.
I have to reply to that before I leave. So that's a a slight difference in what I said and the way you're comparing it to a doctor, right? So the doctor does not have to explain to me what is the decision he made, but there is a trust in the fact that at least the doctor went to medical school, he knows what he's talking about. Same way that, you don't need to know how an automobile operates for you to drive it, right? But the main problem why people don't trust AI is it's not sure even if the designer knows what the AI is saying. Right? So I agree. I'm not saying that explainability is not something that we don't need, but we need to be more well-defined in the kind of questions we are asking of what is this explainability. In fact, there is this argument that perception should not be explained or should not be held up to an explainable thing, but decision making should be, because even we don't know how we perceive things, right? So perception maybe need not be completely explained away, but when you're finally making decisions based on your deep neural network, that needs to be explained. I agree that explainability is needed. I didn't say that, right? So, but what I take issues with, no, sure. Yeah, so of course, if I don't respond, then it doesn't become juicy, right? So, so what the point I'm making is, yes, so somebody needs to understand what the AI is doing, and right now I don't think anybody does. So, yeah, we need to certainly address that question.
Given in the auto sector and the finance as well. See, I would say that there is one more complexity which we seem to miss, which I think is a bigger risk. Most of the new models, especially with the large projects, are federated together. So, for example, take an airline example. Okay, so I have a pricing engine which comes from a Silicon Valley startup. There's an AI system which I run. There's a IoT platform which comes from Microsoft. There's a transaction thing which comes from the same. Nobody knows the other box. It's the API, right? So when you have a problem, whom do you go to? In fact, they themselves won't know. As an example, if I book halal preference in my meal in the flight, can you recommend a halal restaurant to me in Dubai? Well, you will actually cross the limitation of purpose if you do so. But it's a perfectly valid thing because some people expect that you recommend. So there's the limitation of scope versus my ability to. Suppose I say you flout a EU problem, GDPR, I have to retire the data. I can't do it. So these federated models are very complex, both in algorithmic bias and the data bias, or the adversarial data sets. In most of the large programs, let me tell you the range of these MVPs are in the range of $100 million plus. So it's not simple. 5 to 7 companies work with it. Same thing in medical devices. So I find it becomes extremely difficult to figure out where the problem lies, because nobody knows the other guy's system in the first place. Right? So on the philosophy side and sociology side, I would say, judgment by definition is biased. So recommender system is fundamentally a scoring problem. It's a ranking. So you are ranking for the person. So is it illegal versus is it unethical? So I feel that that's where the most of the debate should be.
I think that is where the future is, right? I mean, if you see the world 10 years from now, you will need such systems. You won't be able to survive without such systems, federated systems. And corporations will need to exchange data. There'll have to be, there'll need to be
So I was just joking
agreements between companies.
If the card fails,
right?
you open an app and not the bonnet.
I think that is the need of the hour.
That is the irony.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one thing. Medical diagnostics is one area where really AI has helped a lot. And I know Philips is working on it, even Samsung is working on it. Things like, cardiac wall quantification, right? Or things like follicular imaging, right? Where, those things like 5D imaging, those things are really helping doctors. I'm not saying AI is replacing doctors, but it's helping doctors in improving accuracy, reducing cost of devices, because you can get the same results from a much cheaper device. So a country like India can really benefit with these kind of, but diagnostics.
Yeah, it's happening, and already, there are, for example, low-cost ultrasound machines are coming up, right, which are pretty good. Or you can have like follicular imaging where you can help in, basically assisted reproduction, right, IVF kind of thing, right? So you have follicular imaging, which a lot of advances have been made. Things like valve quantification. Earlier, the valve quantification was a manual process, and it used to take like half an hour for a doctor. Now you can do the same thing in minutes. These kind of things are helping. Yeah, Niramai. Yes.
Age-old. I mean,
Yes.
decades, people knew that yes, through thermal imaging, you could actually catch these tumors well before mammography could. But the problem was there were too many false positives. And again, the promise of Nirama is that hopefully with applying machine learning, you can cut down those false positives, right, to a manageable degree, and you end up getting a much more accurate screening methodology compared to mammography, which is much safer anyways.
And it's much cheaper also.
Much cheaper, much safer.
Sinkable is all that.
Yeah, similar, I guess. Yeah.
AI-based tool. In fact, I don't think there's going to be anything that is 100% purely AI-based. There's going to be significant amount of IoT that's going to be built into it, and significant amount of other kinds of sensor technologies that are going to be built into it, right? There has to be some kind of a federated manufacturing, supply chain for AI that needs to come into play, including things like, protecting the data chain and so on and so forth. And so far we've been talking about. So I think.
I'm the guy who answered that question from US thought when the car hit a pedestrian and we know that it hit somebody because this was connected to the cloud or long-stop system at the time. We wrote a software and asked us to say, and we don't know whether it is a privacy problem or it is because we know that it hit the signal went, right? And it's run the center. That maybe 15 years ago. And I spent 5 years in ambient software. It's the same problem that if you want maneuverability, it is inherently unstable system, right? If you want stability, it's the other way. So this trade-off is always there. However, I think the biggest challenge I find in AI is to discover the fine-grained context. That's where the problem lies. That's where the difficulty.
Completely agree with you on that.
One system can say another context.
So I just wanted to make a point that Arvind Eye hospitals are using Google's diabetic retinopathy deep learning, which is actually one of the big successes. So for medical imaging, they do a retina scan and so it's able to go to villages, and that's actually being used in India right now.
So next I have a policy kind of question for it's policy again. So for example, how to handle, there has been a lot of outcry. Sensitive data have been used for good things, but they could really be used for example, there's this recent they discovered who he was based on the genetic data that distant relative of his kind of. So they had genetic material. His genetic profile was never really there, but basically there was a public genetic database for finding so-called distant relatives. Right? So that was the purpose of the thing, and they found genetic material from crime scenes and uploaded it, and created a fake profile and say, I want to find distant relatives of this person, and they actually found some distant relatives. And based on that, they found essentially, in a way, yeah, it's a good thing. You catch serial killer is always a good thing, but you can see that you don't really have any. It's the same thing, right? You don't have you have very good privacy settings in your Facebook, but your friend does not have very good privacy settings. All your data is same thing with genetic. Right? You might say, well, my genetic data is very sacred. I can never upload it. But if your relatives do that, then it's just as well out there. Right? So is there any policy way for handling this at all? It's similarly in other types of medical, more sensitive data, right? For example, fingerprints, like in Aadhaar, or say face data, like say.
Is it legal to judge a person based on his past data? While the data itself is a question of privacy and whatever it is.
Yes.
But is it right from a legal perspective to judge a person, say, deny a loan or something based on his past? Because the fundamental premise of law is person can correct himself, right?
Only one of the theories, not all.
I don't know. I think maybe aren't the disclaimers when you contact a loan company and when you go through the agreement you sign. I'm sure there will be some disclaimers in place.
I'm just answering the loan part. It is definitely legal to decline if you have defaulted outside. So the credit bureau concept is essentially all banks or loan providers reporting loans so that the next defaulter is.
If you're a bad person, that's fine. But based on the locality, say for example, I'm a student. When I come from
Malia's son be denied a loan?
Sorry?
Can Vijay Malia's son be denied a loan?
I don't know.
No, that's genetic,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Can Vijay Mallya be denied?
Oh, that's also. So there is very little policy mechanism in India to handle all these issues. It's not. It's, it's, it's not surprising we don't have policies for many things that are important. As of now, the privacy law in India is also pretty in the air. It is not comprehensive. We don't really know what it is. Puttaswamy's case is Puttaswamy versus Union of India is probably the only statement that we have a right to privacy. So as of now, when our privacy does not actually, we can't actually confine it within the various parameters that we possess, that is our physiognomic data, our biometric data and so on. I have no understanding of how my relatives' genetic profile should affect my privacy. At least we don't have any statement of policy on that. As far as whether it is right to do or not, like I was saying, probably that this national security, someone mentioned national security is an overarching concept, and you can probably pull out a lot of other resources as well, including genetic data and privacy data, by simply stating that it is in national interest.
Even that they have to make a law, right?
Very,
You cannot claim national interest.
you cannot claim, but if you see, for instance, even in ethics committees, when we get our confidentiality statements written down, privacy and so on, there is a statement that if there is a case, or if the judge requires, or if certain bodies in the government require it, then this data will be made public. Now, there is also this concept in the US to take out trial data, which is bound, sealed by confidentiality. You need the president's assent. Such an order is not there in our guidelines or in our law. So as of now, we will await a court order. If there is a court order which may be appealed, may not be appealed, maybe first instance, second instance, Supreme Court, even that is not clear. As far as we are concerned right now, in order to break the seal of confidentiality, we need a court order. What happens if the security agencies come at us with a warrant? Is that a court order? Again, we really don't know how each ethics committee would decide that particular issue. But as far as hospitals and banks and so on are concerned, a warrant is sufficient for them to disclose certain data which otherwise they cannot access. That's how it is at this point. There is no comprehensive policy on that. We have not adopted the GDPR. So
that's the next question I wanted to ask.
yeah, we haven't.
Work is in progress.
Work is in
The
progress.
bill is not passed, right?
Yes.
Just a draft.
Yes, work is in progress. I mean, it will be in progress for some time.
So while there's no GDPR kind of thing, there is an account aggregator license that the RBI has kind of started, like, at least considering people for. It is very similar in its intent, which is like you should have the ability to share data that you think is beneficial to you in some manner for a service that someone is providing. And I mean, obviously it is work in progress, but there are controls around how that person can use the data, what like stated purpose they're using it for, what controls you have over deleting it. So at least like there is an attempt to go in that direction. For sure, like people can can find fault in that, and like you can make improvements in that over time. But the process at least is starting, and that is encouraging.
I just want to add one aspect about the criminal jurisdiction. There is this concept, there is this controversy going on about Aadhaar as well, whether the data can be used to authenticate that you are you, or to separate you, what is the word, the word doesn't come right now, but to say you are not her and her, right? So authentication means to be able to identify a person as the person he or she claims to be. But whether the data collected for that purpose can be actually used to remove you from a list of suspects is a question. Exclude you from other similar persons is a question that you have to ask. And secondly, whether such data can be used to profile you, I don't agree with that. I don't agree. I don't even agree that Vijay Mallya's son should be denied a loan based on either genetic or other propensities of that family. I think that, no, honestly, and oh, yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So credit rating matters, I think, for certain institutions, but that also can be challenged at some point, saying that I went bankrupt because of certain reasons, and now it's not the same reason. If you're able to, but it's a for-profit company. You cannot, and they have certain mandates to their stakeholders and their management and so on. So that we cannot object to, but in other cases, for instance, saying that I know that this family has 2 radicalized persons, so therefore the next son who comes along, I will not allow him to study in a madrasa. I don't agree with that. I think that kind of, yeah. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. No, yeah.
No, so let me just like call out this thing. Right? I think all of this ties back to one basic problem that like a private company actually can never solve, which is all loan companies, right? Like when they're deciding a loan, they essentially check for political exposure of the person that they're lending to, right? This is a fairly unnecessary criteria. If you believe that the day the person defaults, law in India is good enough for you to recover the money, right? If rule of law is not uniformly applied to people, why is the bar on the private company that's given a loan to somehow extract money from a politically exposed person, right? So now there is a criteria in all loan companies. Maybe they'll not be too public about it, but if you are politically exposed, you will actually not get a loan, right?
In fact, for a long time, American Express would not give credit cards to lawyers.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the idea was that a lawyer will challenge the bill, and therefore they will take it up to the point of what is your profession. And if you say lawyer, then you won't get the second call.
Accepted or rejected? Will you do it voluntarily or will you wait for a regulation to come?
Regulation. I probably should explain that. So, I think the problem is this, right? The way, okay, forget.
We only ask AI for explanations, not you.
No, all right, fair. But, okay, my personal opinion, I think reject reasons should be made available to every loan applicant that is, like, in the US, this is law, there is standard format, and because people were faking it, there is font size format also, right? So you have to put it in a certain font size and a certain font. Now, I think that's the right path forward. Having said that, if one company, again, this boils down to the same problem of like profit, right? Which is if one company chooses to do this, you will be bombarded with customer service calls that you have not like staffed for, right? And then you will be only answering questions of like, what do you mean? And like, what is this and all of that. Like, so you will never be able to do this in isolation. You will not need regulation. Let's say as an industry body, financial services decides to take this step, I would sign up for this, right? But I would not be able, I just don't have the ability to do this in isolation, and definitely not at our size. Like in the sense, let's say I was HDFC and I made the decision, yeah, probably I'd do it, right? Like because I have the overall weight to kind of push that across, like I can become an example. Here I will become like a martyr in the cause essentially, right? So.
I mean, just one point, while I was arguing for AI to be held to a higher standard than humans, I have to also say that I think in India, there's a lot of education that we need to, a lot of sensitization. We are just a society full of biases. If you even look at the question of fairness, think about fairness screens, right? I mean, thing, right, that you could be thinking about in terms of supporting certain biases and so on, right? About fair complexion being better and so on. So I mean, there's a lot of ground for us to cover also, right? In terms of just through sheer education and sensitization for us to become, in some sense, right, a less biased society.
AI will lead to systemic bias.
Yes, I agree, which is why AI has to be still held to a higher standard. I'm saying we need progress on both. We need a lot of progress also on the human aspect.
I think one more thing is, I don't think it's unique to India. As long as human beings are there, as long as society is there, biasness will be there, and it is there. It's not something unique. You can, and if you see the news channel in US, you can see the actual biasness, because the Fox and the CNN, they give completely a different story. In fact, the reality, I am really worried that people are losing in states we are much better off. So I don't think it's unique to India. So whenever there are a group of people, you will have biasness. So again, we are talking, I think our discussion should be focused on AI and the machine learning aspects of biasness. We are slightly going into the societal and other aspects, which is fine, we can have a different discussion on that. But what we are interested here is how are you going to tackle the system and AA part of it and ML part of it. That's where we want to learn and collaborate and exchange ideas.
Should reflect the trolley problem, maybe IIT Madras can do, to add cow into the equation. Pedestrian, cow and a cow. That will be a nice thing.
Let's not even.
That is the problem you will face when you actually train out this kind of thing.
I think the issue has to do with one of the areas that we have to address is diversity in the population that creates AI. I think you mentioned gender in the plenary session. Yeah. So as an IP attorney and as a lawyer, I can tell you that there are very few women in science and technology, and that's probably one major cause of non-gendered or gender gaps in AI. For instance, I'm really surprised why so many robots are female, like Sophia.
We
and
know
so on.
why.
Yeah. Huh? So,
Women know why.
yeah, women know why. Yeah. So that's so one of the things is diversity. I think a lot of work has to be done. It is abysmal. The number of women who work in science and technology and computer science in India is abysmally low and going lower. Looks like there is statistics to prove that the higher the income of the family, the less likely a woman is to work. The higher her level of education, the less likely she is to enter the workforce and so on. So I think one area is gender, the other of course, in spite of the fact that we don't want to discuss human biases, we still have to see that castes and classes and economic classes and regional biases and differences need to be expressed in the forms of AI that we are evolving, and also in the kinds of people who are engaging in drafting the algorithms, writing the algorithms, testing these algorithms, putting them to trial, samples that we are studying in ethics clinical trial ethics. One of our core questions is about the sample that we are allowing the trial to be conducted in. So a lot of I think Pram was also mentioning that the AI often doesn't recognize women's voices as well as it does men. So these inherent biases, I think one area definitely we need to understand is industry is not diverse enough, users are not diverse enough.
Just want to point out that the large part of AI is data, right? Because AI is just an algorithm, but the data makes a lot of difference. And data collection is not easy. It's expensive. It's expensive, time-consuming, very laborious process, and the variety of data is very, very important. Because even small amounts of very different type of data, for example in images, right, like data under different conditions, lighting conditions, or different people from different age, ethnicity, race, images, persons, disability, many times these things are ignored. Children, the data, for example, voice assistants when you're teaching them, we realize that we haven't really trained the assistant for children's voice, but now we are realizing because it's critical. Because phones typically would not be handled by a child, right? But the moment you go to the AI speakers, right, those children would use. So we realize that, that's a huge gap. So things like that, which are not obviously thought of, but we need a systematic ways of finding out where there are these biases. So today the biases are coming as an afterthought. We realize, we didn't do this, but there should be ways of figuring out these issues much earlier.
Yeah, so I think you're kind of missing the ball, because exactly what you're saying, the data for AI is crowdsourced. So if a Dalit person does not have access to the phone, their data does not go up.
So it's a self-propagating thing, right?
So and there's two kinds of biases. One is the examples. So first of all, we have fewer examples coming from women, coming from Dalits, coming from say Aborigines, right? Then there's the bias of labels. If it's going to be a white man sitting in the USA marking a street as looking safe or not safe, that's where the human bias is coming in collecting the label. So there is the example bias, which is coming from society. The label bias is also coming from society. Who's labeling the data, right? And then there is the bias of who is modeling, which Map pointed out is that if the women and people from diverse backgrounds are not modeling the data, so there is like three levels, and in all three, we cannot ignore the fact that human society is entrenched in biases.
That's what I said.
So we can't ignore that.
I'm not saying that. That's
When
what I
you're
said.
modeling this, this kind of data will be very less. So you need to model in such a way that this data gets enough
But, that's precisely what I said, that
example,
human
right?
beings being there, there will be biasness. So how do you take care of an AI learning
So
system is the
just
question.
one follow-up is I'm an econometrician trained in machine learning. That's my PhD. So econometricians have been doing this work for a while. This is, I know this what happens often with technocrats and computer scientists is that, oh, this has never been studied. Oh, how do we deal with bias? Or how do we, this is something that econometricians and many of the ones who win Nobel Prizes have actually studied what happens when the data is biased, how do you correct for it. So this is not a new problem. You don't have to, you will be reinventing the wheel and putting in a lot of effort if computer scientists think that they're the first person to think of this problem and be able to solve it from scratch. So I think engaging not just with people from different diverse backgrounds, but also that sociological background, but academic backgrounds. There are people in philosophy, in ethics, in econometrics, in sociology, anthropology, who have been thinking of these questions. So this is not brand new.
In fact, one of the core requirements that we have when a proposal is being presented is whether the sample has been identified by a biostatistician. We actually have a very small number of biostatisticians who are experts, and these biostatisticians are supposed to have data and expertise on demography, on anthropology, on culture, and various other forms of diversity and so on. So
just to mention that, for example, India is embarking on this sequencing 10,000 Indians across India because we are a large number of subpopulations. So one of the anthropological debates that we had was that if a worker goes and collects genome information, like taking cotton swab, who would it be, a male person or would it be a female? And generally most, and this is a societal problem, it's not the samplers, like the person who's collecting the samples problem, is that in many rural families, a male person would be presented as a representative of that village. So if you were to go to a small community where you want to collect genome data from, more than likely it would be a male whose sample would be collected rather than the female. Because most of the time people are always very anxious about sharing anything, especially in rural communities. So one of the biases that we already know that will come out of this data would be that majority of the genome sequenced in India for the first phase would be males. Can we take care of that? Maybe or maybe not, because this is how the society is. So it is also very important for us to understand when we are collecting data is that we already are aware of the biases before we start, say, generalizing it onto the other half of the population when we are trying to build any policy, algorithm or whatever. So this is something that one should be also aware when we are, as you were saying, that female voices are not being recognized because most of the trainers would have been males. Here, female genomes would not be represented because most of the members who would come and give samples would be males. I'm not saying all would be, no, there would be no female, but majority of the rural populations would be males.
Do people like it? Do policy people like it? Do the industry people like it? And so that's the first question. Yeah.
So that's a hard question to answer. I didn't draft this or wasn't involved in for you in the audience. I'm a science and technology officer for the Dutch consulate in Mumbai. Thank you very much for the lively discussion. It was a lot of fun. Before I answer the question, I want to express a little bit of a small story, perhaps. In '94, when I was using internet, it was hard to find stuff, but at least the internet was servicing me. And what I find now when I use the internet is that it serves a lot of companies and a lot of people, but I'm the last one to be serviced by internet. Perhaps if I directly talk to someone, I don't have this problem. But what I hope for the development of AI is that it will be in service of people and not only in service of companies who want to basically sell more stuff to us. On the GDPR, I think as a European, I'm very glad it's there. Because the European Union took a bold step to make this legislation. And I think what is happening with a lot of other things that are that happened in my country more specifically, is that the world turns its eyes to Europe for an innovation, and whether it's good or bad or how much of it is useful in India, I don't know. But at least it opens up the debate for this, and it makes an anchor point that we can use to adjust it further and to help us all along. So especially from the ethics part, I wish the people in India a great deal of wisdom in incorporating that, as I think people are not as rational as we think to start with. So I hope the AI will be more rational than we actually are.
So that's a lot. So Martin. So the question is, I have one more question.
Well,
so,
one more question.
So this question was suggested by Krishnan. So he wanted to ask on, how has the public-private partnership route in, say, the EU worked out for AI? So how,
yeah. So by sort of law, it is a requirement that when the government spends funding also on research, that companies are involved in these type of projects, which I think is a good thing in terms of transparency, but also in terms of supporting an economy, because you just increase your chances of this R&D actually finding its way into the market. So these public-private partnerships are a very interesting way of doing things, especially if you want to include your population. So in terms of working together, not only with an institute working with a cooperation, with a business, involving the public is also something that's really interesting. We have a few examples from electric mobility, but also from sensors that are hooked up to phones to measure air quality, where people would just be handed a sensor and they would bike around or drive around in the city, and it would yield a lot of measurement that in itself wasn't very accurate, because all these sensors aren't as accurate as the fancy equipment that you put on some building, but you have a very nice range, so you cover your city much more accurately than just doing the single measurement or doing the measurement at two different points. So you save a lot of money doing it, and the side effect is that you involve the general public, because they are getting handed a sensor, they take an interest in what you're doing. And I would love to see AI projects run like that when it comes to crowd management, or there's different types of areas where we can involve people, so we can teach them also what AI is, because if we have to take it just from the news, then understanding it will be very tricky. So public-private partnerships are a requirement. But I think the side effect is even that it is much more easy to involve the public in your efforts, and which I think is a good idea for a corporation, but also from the institutes, it's good to involve the general public.
Yeah, it's great. Thank Martin. So with that, we'll wrap up the panel discussion. So I'm sure that all of you are hungry. So let's just wrap up. Yeah, let's.